It's time to start rallying around America's young conservatives and explore what it means to be a young Republican in the 21st century. In a world where it seems like everyone under 30 must be a liberal, these are the stories you haven't heard before from the voices of America's young conservatives. So let's find out what it truly means to be raised right. Hello, my fellow raised right conservatives out there. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend and are ready to start a new week fighting for your freedoms and for our country. I'm your host, Rae'Lee Klein, a fellow young conservative myself, who just loves standing up for what's right in the world and First Amendment specifically. And this week on the Raised Right podcast, I'm really excited about this conversation. So this kind of sprung on me like out of the blue from one of my conservative sisters out here in Arizona who knew an investigative journalist, an Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist. You may have heard of him. His name's Ben Swann, who is starting a brand new media platform to fight big tech and censorship. And that's about as far as my knowledge goes when it comes to technology. I don't know the nitty-gritty. I don't know blockchain. I don't know anything deep like that. And so I was not sure what to expect walking into this, but I'm just like blown away by what is going on in our country when it comes to big tech and social media. And Ben just shines all the light in the world as to why we need to get off these platforms and move to something that is sovereign. I mean, that's really just the best way to put it. So without further ado, let's find a solution to what our biggest problem is when it comes to social media and hear it from one of the best experts in the world, Ben Swann. Ben, why don't you just go ahead and talk a little bit about your background in investigative journalism?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. Thanks for having me on, by the way. So 20 years, 20 plus years now that I've been a broadcast journalist, worked for CBS, Fox, NBC, really you're kind of across the board here, and spent a long time. Started out as a news videographer and photographer, became what they called at the time a one-man band. I don't think they call them that anymore. I think they're now called like a video journalist, right?
Yeah.
And then from there became a morning anchor, primetime anchor. Been around the country, Texas, Ohio, and then last stop was here in Atlanta. And about 3 years ago, I started to see that things were changing, obviously, in the broadcast landscape, but most importantly, in the social landscape. And what I saw happening in terms of social media was that there was a coming purge, right? And 3 years ago, you're talking about, hey, there's going to be a purge, and all these people who are truth tellers on the internet who have been building their audiences now at that time for close to 10 years, everyone's going to get disappeared, right? This is on its way. There was a shift after Trump got elected in 2016, because the reality is, while the mainstream media lined up against him, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, these different social platforms really were where Trump supporters went to communicate with each other. And so there was a big push to say, we've got to get control of these spaces. In fact, there was a whole Media Matters for America presentation done about this that basically explained that the reason that Clinton lost was because while Media Matters had complete control of broadcast media, they were not in control of social media, and their plan to essentially take control of that. And so I saw that coming and began kind of thinking through a process of what would it be to create a separate, an answer, if you will, to big tech and the purge that was on its way. Well, sure enough, that purge came. Obviously, it hit, around 2016. It kind of started 2017. It got stronger, and then by 2019, and of course 2020, during COVID, we saw this enormous, just sweeping purge that took place. Just really incredible if you think about it. So all of this took place. All of this was happening across the country. And we started thinking through, okay, so how are we going to build this? So we started working on a project to build an answer to the issues of censorship. Censorship is really two things, right? One side of it is the content creator and the user who are being censored off of platforms, removed from platforms. So we were trying to think through a way of dealing with that. But then came a company called Parler, right? And remember Parler, right at the height of this year, early, January 2020, was removed from the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store, and Amazon deleted them from their servers. And when they did that, they took which was at the time the #1 app on the Apple App Store, and disappeared it from the internet. And so one form of censorship is the user and the content creator. But the other form of censorship is the big tech collusion that takes place when these companies decide they're going to work together, really to destroy any competitor, any competition who might come into that space. And so the second part of thinking through this project was, well, how do we create an alternative so that we can't be censored or removed by other big tech companies? And so we're launching on October 25th, Sovren.media, Sovren, Sovren.media. And it is an answer to both those things. It is a free speech platform, social media, premium video, streaming video, and social media. But it also, we're building a technological answer to the big tech issue of collusion. How do we remove the issue of collusion? Well, one way you do that, we're building on the blockchain. And the idea is to basically separate ourselves from Silicon Valley tech and taking part in an entirely new revolutionary tech space that is the blockchain.
That's amazing. Definitely something that seems like it's a lot of work, but so needed
Yes.
at this time. So needed for sure. I mean, Parler was shut down within weeks. Like it didn't even really get off the ground before it was just absolutely obliterated.
Yep.
So what are some steps that you guys are taking to ensure that this doesn't end up like another Parler where it's just gone in a couple weeks?
Yeah, well, the first thing is you cannot find us on the app stores. We will have no apps on Apple's App Store or Google's. We're using web native apps instead, which you will be able to download directly from our platform so that when you have it on your phone, you can access it directly through your phone. If you do it any other way, it's not going to work. And by the way, you've probably seen that President Trump has announced his new social media that will launch next year. I know I shouldn't be talking about his social media here, but listen, if he's listening to your podcast, he probably does, then I would just give advice to his people. Get off the app stores, because what they're doing is they're allowing you to bring everyone in, and the way everyone is now accessing you. So say it this way, you're building this amazing house, right? You have this great piece of land, you're building your dream house. The problem is you're surrounded by neighbors and you have no access, right, to your home. Well, if you built that way, people would say you're nuts, because now this neighbor puts up a wall and this neighbor puts up a wall and you can't get to your beautiful house, or once you're inside, you can't get out, right? There's no access, there's no easement. And so that's what happens if you build on these traditional technologies, if you use AWS servers, or if you really use any kind of server that is a traditional server, AWS can get to you. Why? Because they control 40% of all cloud storage in the entire country, right? 40%. Now, that's a pretty amazing number. And the rest go to Microsoft and Google and Oracle. So you have these other companies that are controlling it, but Amazon is such a big player. Let's say that you create your site, or we have our site on traditional servers. To get rid of us, Amazon just goes to that company, gives them some contracts to do work for them worth a few tens of millions of dollars, and says, hey, but in order to have these contracts, you got to kick these guys off your server. You think that hosting company is going to keep us? No way. So what we're doing is we're not going to the app stores. And then in terms of our blockchain technology, we're using an IPFS system. Let me break that down for you. Basically, it's decentralized server storage. There's no single place where our servers will be. There's no one single location. Instead, we're spread out globally through a decentralized server system. For folks who know what Bitcoin is, right? Bitcoin is built upon decentralized technology on the blockchain as a financial representation of that. They call that DeFi, all right? Decentralized finance. We're creating something now called DeSo, decentralized social, which means that all of our tech is being built in a decentralized way so that we can't be taken down with a single attack or a single company coming against us.
I love that. That's great. So for a normal user like me who knows nothing about tech and the behind the scenes stuff of social media, what's the experience going to be like, and how is it different from just your normal Facebook, Twitter, or how is it similar?
Yeah, so it'll be very similar. You won't really see the difference. Now, eventually, there will be steps you can take where you can get more complicated if you want to. So, for instance, you'll be able to create a similar login system to having a cryptocurrency wallet, right? You'll have a similar system. But if you don't know how to do that, you're like, I'm a newbie, or as a noob, I think as you kids call it today. Yeah, I don't really know how to do this stuff, right? The way you would do it instead is just you log in a regular way with either a phone number or an email. And so what we're doing is, and this has been the hardest part of this, okay, is taking very complicated blockchain technology, which is very complicated, and then creating an interface that's very simple so that you as a user don't know the difference. That's our goal, is so that when you log on, it just feels like you're logging onto a Facebook or an Instagram or a Twitter. You don't see the difference. that's the workload on our part. Our job is not to make it difficult for you. Our job is to make it as easy for you as possible and make it as hard as possible for tech companies to interrupt.
That's awesome. So I know a big concern pretty much every generation has is that of privacy. Your messages, your pictures, and you upload that stuff. It's kind of assumed now that it's in the big tech's hands. They have that forever and can be pulled up whenever. So what are you guys doing to fight that with Sovren, and how's that look different on your platform?
Well, it's different in a couple of ways. Number one, we are not selling data, right? So if you go on Facebook or you go on any of these big tech platforms, you're the product, right? If Facebook is not the product. What advertisers are selling you is not the product. You are the product being sold to advertisers. We're not doing that. We're not selling data. We're not sharing data, first of all. But second of all, because of our IPFS system, because of the fact that we're decentralizing all of our storage, it makes it almost impossible for hackers to be able to come in and attack our system and say, oh, look, we got in and we were able to access data. Why? Because we're not storing all this data together. Instead, the data is fractured, broken up, and it's spread out globally. So again, there's no centralized system to be able to attack. So as you probably know, like Sinclair Broadcasting, I think just this past week was hacked. Right, ransomware attackers got into their system. They were able to take a whole bunch of data, private files, information, right? They collected all this stuff. Why? Because Sinclair has everything built on centralized storage in a centralized location, which means once you're in, you have access to everything. So if you decentralize this, and by the way, this is just a smart thing in general, right? For where tech needs to be going, is stop storing everyone's data in a freaking treasure chest on your servers, right? Because it makes it so easy. When a hacker gets in, then they have access to everything. They're able to access credit cards, access phone numbers, access passwords, and get into everything. But by breaking that up and decentralizing it and having fragments of information everywhere, it makes it almost impossible for hackers to get to it. It's much more secure.
Which is awesome to hear for everybody that, goes on that platform knows they're going to be a lot more safe than they would on Facebook or anything else. So I want to backtrack to something that you said earlier, and this is kind of a two-part question. You mentioned this giant purge on social media, and we heard about it in the news. Some people went to, the Facebook jail, but a lot of people just like their social media stuff didn't change, but they were still impacted. What, I guess, were the details of the purge? What really happened?
Well, a couple of things have happened. And again, it's happened in different ways over a period of time. But essentially, it's been kind of threefold. Number one, you have certain content creators who were just flat out removed, right? Obviously, you get rid of those people. And you can go all the way back to 2017. And it's Alex Jones, I think, was removed, right, from Facebook at that time. And he was an easy one. And by the way, I stuck up for Alex Jones at the time and said he should not be removed and he should not be deleted. There's a thing called self-censorship. If you don't like what Alex Jones has to say, don't listen to Alex Jones, right? The idea that YouTube needs to protect you from Alex Jones is insane. But a lot of people were okay with that because they didn't like Alex Jones. They say, oh, he's crazy. He's a crazy man. He's screaming about fluoride in the water. And so get rid of him. It doesn't matter. The problem is that when you don't speak up for that individual being removed, right, then it just leads to the next one and the next one and the next one. It's kind of like what Apple does when they say, I want to go through your iPhone and your iCloud storage, but I'm only going to look for child pornography, right? Well, because we can all agree child pornography is terrible. So yeah, go ahead. You can look through everyone's iCloud, but they're not looking just for child pornography. They're asking you to hand them the keys to your life for the purpose of eliminating something that we can all agree is terrible. And then they start redefining what is terrible, right? And we've seen this happen. This playbook happens so many times. So part of the purge was outright removing people. The second thing is the shadow banning, right? So shadow banning is a huge problem. To me, shadow banning is actually worse than an all-out purge. I would rather companies just go out and say, we're throwing everyone off the platform, because at least it's more honest. It's more honest to say, our platform does not want your voice, than to say, no, we'll leave you up, but our algorithm will hide you so that no one can see what you're doing. You think you're posting and you think people can see it. And maybe 1%. So I'll tell you this, for my personal experience, Facebook and Instagram, 1% of my viewers can see what I put up. 99% of them cannot see what I'm posting, which is insane because every single person who follows me on those platforms has voluntarily chosen to follow me. No one's being forced. No one's being made. And this is where it really becomes kind of insane. I even think there's a legal argument to be made here. People will say, well, they're private companies, they can do what they want. Well, to some extent, but I think you can make the argument that a private company that brings in a user under the auspices of that user having the freedom to follow pages and get information, and then decides, well, we're not actually going to let you do that, right? We're going to tell you you can, and then we're going to make you think you can, but we're just going to hide it from you. It would be like going into a restaurant and then saying to you, have a seat. This is all the stuff that we have, that we serve here. But actually, every time you ask for something, well, we don't have that. We don't have that. Even though they do have it in the back. It's sitting right back there, right? If you went into a restaurant like that, you'd say, why am I being discriminated against? Why are you not serving me the thing that I'm asking for that you do have? Right. And if the restaurant then said to you, oh, it's because we're trying to protect you. We're just trying to keep you safe because you might not like the way this thing tastes, or this thing might give you a stomach ache, you would think that this was preposterous. Like, there's no way I'm going to eat here. I'll never come back here again. And yet we keep coming back to these social media companies over and over. So there was the outright purge. It was the shadow banning that was taking place. And now there's been a second movement of purging. And that is the medical misinformation community standards purging. And by the way, some of the purge that's also taken place through that is the fact checking, right? And to me, the fact checking, I think there's another legal argument here, because a fact checker, and I've been fact checked a lot, they're always wrong, because one of the problems with the fact checkers is they have no requirement to prove that what you're saying is untrue. So, right, I'll do a report on something and it's up on Facebook, and then all of a sudden it'll be labeled as being misleading or missing context, right? They put this big thing over the front of you that you're a big liar, right? Don't trust this person. And then it says underneath CY. And when you click the CY, it's an unrelated article. It's an article that's like vaguely in the same subject, but they're not addressing anything specifically that I'm reporting on. They're not addressing specifically documentation that I'm showing as a reporter. They're just saying, in general, this thing's not allowed. And what they'll do is they'll take the most kind of ubiquitous comment, right, that's hard to even follow exactly what was said. It'll usually be some random person who just posts online a comment, and then they say, we're fact checking this comment, right? Is it true? So for instance, you could say, I was fact checked on the story I did over a year ago, right? One of the first ones they hit me with was on masking, right? The efficacy of masks. And by the way, there's so much information out there that masks just don't work the way they say they are. They do not stop viruses, period. That's a fact. Mm-hmm. And there's so much documentation. There's a decade worth of studies that have proven this over and over. Well, what they'll do is they'll take a comment from someone like this Facebook poster says masks are actually a trick in order to cause you to contract not just COVID, but AIDS. I'm just making this up, right? But it'll be some like random comment. It's not an article. It's not a report. It's just a comment. And then a fact checker will write about that comment saying this is a lie. And then what they'll do is they'll go around looking for any comments or actual reporting on masking, and they'll apply that comment to it. Like, oh, we've already settled this. This is not true. I don't know if you follow exactly how I'm laying this out, but it's a very convoluted way of being able to fact check you without ever bothering to look at your sources. So mm-hmm. Here's one of the things they've done is they have literally gone out and defamed many of us. They've defamed many journalists, many reporters, many just average people, right, who are up there posting things. They've defamed them, they've libeled them and they've slandered them by saying these people are lying to you. These people are liars. As a journalist, it's especially offensive to me to be labeled as a liar and spreading misinformation, and no one is required to prove that I'm spreading misinformation. No one's required to have any system where they say, hey, you know what, Ben Swan says this is true, here's why it's untrue, right? There's no appeals process for me to say, hey, by the way, here's the documentation that I have about this. Here's the eyewitness accounts of what we're talking about. No, because a fact checker from USA Today simply declares it to be untrue. So those are kind of the three phases that we've seen of the purge, and it's quite candidly, it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse.
Yeah, and when you put it out like that, it just seems so black and white. It seems right and wrong. So why have they been able to get away with it so easily for so long?
Well, they get away with it because, first of all, they have all the money, right? So no one fights Facebook on anything in Congress, because Congress is the only place you could fight them, right? Antitrust, they talk about breaking these companies up. Google, Amazon, Twitter, Apple, who's actually going to take these guys on? They're putting so much money into everything, first. But second of all, because the process of fact checkers or purging content creators or shadow banning is always pointed in one direction, right? It's always pointed, and it's not pointed just to the right. I know this is Raising Right, but it's not just pointed to the right. It's pointed to anyone who is not part of the current neoliberal establishment. It's a very small group, but there are a lot of people, like, for instance, who are progressives or Green Party activists. They're also purged, right? There are left-leaning libertarians, and they're getting purged. There are right-leaning libertarians who are purged, independents who are purged, and then people on the right. It's not just the left versus right. It is a neoliberal order at the top of all the positions of power in our society: academia and education, media, Silicon Valley and big tech, politics, banking, corporations, right? This very small group of people, but everything that YouTube does, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, and Apple, everything that those companies do is geared toward empowering that neoliberal order and disempowering the population. And that's why they get away with it.
Wow. It's crazy. It just like boggles my mind that that's been able to be done for so long and there's no pushback.
No pushback at all. And there won't be pushback. Here's the thing, is that if we are waiting for and I will tell you this, even when Trump was president, right, he said some things about big tech companies, but even his administration didn't really push back on big tech. They toward the very, very end, the then Attorney General Bill Barr started looking at a lawsuit against Google. But in terms of really pursuing, like, the Republican Party is not pursuing breaking up big tech. They call it, free market. This is not a free market. It is not being treated as a free market. And so for all you young people who listen to this podcast, who are being led to believe that free market principles are at play here, they are not at play here. The free market does not exist when there are monopolies. That is not part of the free market. And so the Republicans aren't doing anything, Democrats aren't doing anything, and really big tech is running pretty much everything, not just here, but globally. I mean, they've become nation states in and of themselves.
Right. They're the superpower. They run it all. So for average users like myself, or just, our noobs out there that are on social media, what are some, things that we can do now to kind of beat the algorithm, beat the game, other than, of course, joining Sovren, your new platform? What do we need to be doing?
Well, I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to stop playing their game, right? So every time you're on social media and you share something that you think is of value, you're basically yelling into a hole in the ground, right? No one can hear you because the algorithms are already set up and designed to be able to prevent that content from being shared. It is, by the way, and this is what's really interesting to me, it's why Facebook is dying. Right? Facebook had amazing traffic in 2016. It's not like, I know young people say Facebook's for old people. Well, it is, right? But it doesn't mean that it doesn't make money. It doesn't mean it's not a vibrant place. In 2016, 5 years ago now, Facebook was an unbelievably active ecosystem of content sharing because, again, it's where people went because they couldn't get good information through mainstream media. And then to watch the decline of Facebook over the last 5 years, it is an intentional, specific decline being made to say, well, we're not going to allow it to be used in a way that harms those who are powerful. Therefore, we're just not going to let it be used at all. And someone like Mark Zuckerberg is actually letting this company die. He's allowing it to be completely destroyed. It's why they just changed the name from Facebook. Right? His parent company is no longer going to be Facebook. They're creating a new parent company, and Facebook's going to be this minimized property within the Facebook, WhatsApp, Messenger, Oculus, and Instagram system. All these companies in Facebook, the name brand becomes the most isolated. So it's really interesting to watch how that's happening. But so back to your question, what can you do? Well, one thing you can do is I would encourage all of you, first of all, come to Sovren, SOVREN.media, get your username, and then start using the existing Facebook and Instagram and Twitter accounts that you have simply to tell people to go to a different site in order to get the information that you're sharing, right? So what I would recommend people to do is, this is how I'm going to be using them, is only to use them as a way of saying to people who haven't moved over, if you want to know about this thing, then come over here. Right? It's basically walking into that same restaurant that I was talking about earlier, standing at the table and saying, hey, if you actually want to eat, just go across the street because we're actually serving over there, right? And they're not going to want me in their restaurant saying that. Don't interrupt our guests. This is our business. But that's what we need to be doing, is every time we see someone walking in to the place where they can't get fed saying, do I wait before you go any further? We're actually eating over here. right? You can actually get what you're looking for. And so I think that's what we need to do. Stop playing their game and pretending that those companies are actually a location where people can become informed. It's not. But if you have any influence there, any way to beat the algorithms, don't post anything about vaccines. Don't post anything about free speech. Don't post anything about Trump. Just tell people, I'm posting over here. If you want to see what I'm talking about over here, go across the street.
I like it. And hopefully people follow. I mean, I think a lot of the times we're scared of change. We're scared to do something new. We're scared to lose our quote unquote popularity and our influence that people have built on these platforms. Yeah. But really, we got to put our safety and our privacy first. And it sounds like it's getting out of hand.
Real quick to that point, I understand that it is hard to rebuild a following, and believe me, I know I've built huge followings on social media, and it's very difficult and it's very time consuming. But one thing that I have found is that it's all for naught, right? Because you spend all this time building it, and so you are protective. You're like, I don't want to leave this thing behind, but at the same time, you got to realize that this thing no longer has any value. Right? If no one can see you, no one can hear you, then what's the point of being there? And then the other thing is, and this is infuriating to me, is when you do go to these sites, like it's unbelievably boring. Like I can't even go on Facebook anymore because if I scroll through my feed, it's nothing but like food and sponsored content, you know, from like, it's all very benign, nothing that really stands out. And I know they're like, oh, you hear about this Facebook whistleblower saying Facebook's just trying to make you angry. I wish they would. At least it would be more interesting than the stuff that they're serving up to you. So, you know, it's become kind of a wasteland. And I really hope that people will start to say, well, especially as we move towards another election next year, let's start really, you know, engaging in conversation about things that are meaningful. There's a lot of stuff happening right now, insane things that are happening in our country right now. And we got to be able to talk about them.
Absolutely. So what happens if another election cycle comes up and we don't make that change? Where are we headed?
Wow. Well, I think what we end up with, first of all, if we don't make that change by the next election cycle, we're going to be very surprised by the results of that election cycle. I really think that you got to remember that, you know, I'm not even sure where this podcast plays, so I don't know what I can talk about. But let me say this: if you're on YouTube, I apologize. But you know, you can't talk about election integrity. You can't talk about any questions about the election. Look, let's set all the you know, the weird votes and the drop boxes and the, you know, ballots pulled out from under tables. Set all that aside. Not that we should, but let's just do that for the sake of argument. Set all that aside, and it's like, but the biggest influencers in the election in 2020 was social media. It was companies like Facebook and Google censoring results, stopping people from seeing information, refusing to allow the Hunter Biden story to be posted on social media, right? Those are, by the way, all of that is criminal. It's criminal. When you act out in a way to intentionally alter the results of an election for a population, it is election interference. There's no other term for it. And yet they get away with that. So do you think as we move towards the next midterm election in which this progressive kind of Marxist agenda that's been pushed for the last year and a half is now going to have a chance to run up against a wall finally? Do you think that they're just going to lay down quietly and be like, it's fine, we had 18 months, whatever we got, and we're done? No, they're going to do everything they can to remove candidates from those platforms, refuse to allow candidates to speak. Any stories that look bad for the administration are going to be suppressed once again. They're going to hide all of it from you. And so we're going to see, I think, a ramping up of it. It's going to get really bad. And I think there'll be another huge purge, by the way, of content creators after we get into 2022. Just before the election, you're going to see them all starting to drop like flies again.
Right. And it seems like as soon as those election cycles happen and they come up, that's when it gets really bad.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I can totally see that happening. And the further we let them push that line, the more they're going to do it and get away with it. So, yeah, the aspiring attorney in me is like, how are they getting away with this? I mean, why has it been so easy for it to just happen under our feet and not be stopped?
Well, and it's also because, you know, we have a judicial system that's not doing anything, right? Our judicial system has become so politicized that judges are political appointees. They're not arbiters of the law. They don't look at the law and say, let's make sure that we're protecting the rights of the people. For the most part, they've become political operatives who are assigned to these positions. And so there's no one standing up for us anymore, right? It used to be, well, if the politicians are bad, at least you can go to the courts because the courts will uphold it. No, not anymore. And so you see over and over, the fight over vaccine mandates, the fight over the elections themselves. You hear all the commentators on TV will tell you, there have been 20 different lawsuits filed on the election and all of them showed nothing. That's a lie. That's not true. There were 20 attempts at trying to essentially go into court to challenge the results based upon various bits of evidence, and the courts dismissed them all. The court said we won't hear it, and in most cases said because those who are filing the lawsuits have no standing. That's what actually happened. It wasn't that the court looked at the evidence and said there's nothing here. Is that they said you don't have a right to even ask the question.
Wow, that's scary. I mean, it's just like, where do we go from here? So thank you, first of all, for creating an alternative to get us away from this mainstream media that is just so damaging in so many ways. And thank you for bringing so much truth, to this podcast and just shining light and sunshine onto what's really happening. Because I think a lot of people either just don't know or they don't really care yet because they haven't been shown the full consequences.
Well, I think that's true. And the good thing is that when they start to wake up, we'll be there. We'll be ready for them.
Awesome. So you launch on Monday, this coming Monday, the 26th.
25th, yes. October 25th, Monday, yes.
Awesome. And what can users expect, when they get logged on if they want to switch over?
Well, what they'll be able to do is set up their username and their account. Starting Monday, they'll be able to start posting there, and then they'll be able to see the content creators who will be there. So we have a number of them who are coming over, and hopefully they'll have their channels. It's going to take them a few days to get their channels up and running, but there will be content there that they can start looking at and sharing already on the site. So and hopefully we're going to increase the number of content creators who are coming over. But already, there's going to be some great channels on there to start going through that content. And the good thing is this: once you follow someone, you will see 100% of their feed. There's no shadow banning. There's no algorithm that's going to hide it from you. You get to see what you choose to follow.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Ben, for coming on and sharing this with us. We're really excited for something like that to get started and off the ground from someone who's been through it all and knows just how evil it can get.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
If you're a conservative ready to stand firm in their beliefs and fight for freedom, you're not going to want to miss a single episode of the Raised Right podcast. You can subscribe on any of your favorite podcast apps so you're up to date on what's going on in the political world. Be sure to like, follow, and share our content on the Instagram page at Raised Right Podcast and Facebook and Twitter at Raised Right Pod. This is what it means to be raised right.